Good afternoon, and welcome to the August Dementia Dialogue. My name is Lori Nissen, and I'll be the moderator today. Our program is called Helping the Person with Dementia Feel Worthwhile. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing in your questions in the question pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and I will be collecting them and we'll address them during the Q&A at the end of today's session. We are unable to take live questions from those of you exclusively on the phone. However, we've provided contact information at the end of the presentation that you can use if you have a specific concern or question that needs to be addressed. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker for today's session. Heather Mulder is the Outreach Program Manager at Banner Alzheimer's Institute, where she assists in the creation and delivery of a variety of education and support programs for people with dementia and family caregivers.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Lori, and thank you to all of you who have joined in what I think is an incredibly important topic and sometimes a challenging one for caregivers, both family caregivers and professional caregivers alike. And that is, how do I fill my person's day with meaning and purpose? Today I have a few objectives that I want to cover with all of you. First, I want to have a little bit of a discussion on understanding where worth comes from. Where do we get that feeling from? And how our roles help with that definition and define who we are as an individual. I also want to discuss activities and how dementia impacts a person's ability to participate, to engage and initiate in activities. And then we'll finally wrap it up by talking about strategies that we can use to modify activities. My hope is that we don't just sweep an activity away from a person with dementia. Most activities, honestly, have not run into an activity that we can't find some way to modify it so that a person with dementia can still participate in these activities that bring them joy. So let's start our discussion by learning a little bit more about worth. And I looked up the definition of worth. It's an adjective, and it means equivalent in value to the sum. Which that reminds me of that quote from Aristotle, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And when we think of where we derive worth from, it comes from all of the roles that we play, the many, many pieces that come together that make us a unique individual. That's where we find our worth from in our day-to-day lives. When we look at a little expanded version, worthwhile, worthwhile is also an adjective. And it means worth the time, money, or effort spent, of value or importance. So helping the person with dementia feel worthwhile is we're trying to help them still feel that they are a valuable contributor to their environment. Honestly, this is all of us want to feel worth, and we want to feel worthwhile in the world that we're living in. This doesn't change when someone develops dementia. What changes is their ability to strike out on their own and be able to find those feelings independently. And that's really where our role comes in. So when we take a step back from worth, we know the end result is we want them to have these feelings of purpose and value and importance in our world. And we find that worth through the different roles that we play in life. And in an article called The Role Theory, I found a quote that throughout life, individuals transfer into and out of different roles, keeping some, leaving others behind, and beginning new roles. And if you reflect on the many transitions that have happened in your life, you can think about roles that you have picked up that have changed, that have gotten modified as circumstances have changed, and also how you leave roles at the same time. When it comes to leaving those roles or bringing in new ones, these role transitions accompany transitions through the life stages. It can be easy or difficult depending on the timing and the social context. So reflecting on our own lives, perhaps you've had the experience of that transition between being at home with your family and that transition into adulthood. Maybe that happened when you went off to college and you had that first time away from your parents and from that role that you've played. So there was a significant adaptation in that. The other role transition that we need to keep in mind for the person with dementia is the fact that they now do have dementia, another major role transition for them. Not only has this added one into their life that at times can be easy, at other times can be quite difficult for them, but it's going to change nearly every other role that they currently hold as well. When I reflect on these roles and think of all of these different pieces that come in to make an individual, this is just a very brief example of the sum of my parts. So I am a mom, and yes, this was a shameless attempt at showing off a picture of who I think is the cutest 18-month-old in the world. So I am a mom. That's a major role in my life right now. I am also a friend. I am a student. I am a professional. At one point in time, I was a caregiver. This is just very few of the pieces that come together to make Heather. And every individual has all of these different pieces that come together to create that sum of their parts. When we look more specifically at these roles that I hold, again, just a few of the examples that I have, they can be broken down into even more roles that are played with those broad categories. So as a mom, I am a teacher, I'm a cook, I'm also a maid, I'm a nurturer. Of course, this is just a very small selection of the many roles that go in to make that broad category of I am a mother. You know, the thing with the role of mom is I know that this one is going to be constantly changing. My son, who is 18 months old right now, needs certain things from me that in a few years or in a decade or so, he's going to need very different things from me. Another role that I hold very dear is that of a friend. And if we break that one down, I am a confidant. I am a troublemaker. I am an encourager. There's many different components of that role, friend, as well. When it comes to professional, I am a connector, a creator, an advocate, an educator. And finally, as a caregiver, I was a scheduler. I was again an advocate. I was an organizer. I was an interpreter. So many pieces came together to create that broad category of the role caregiver or professional or friend. Even though I'm not a caregiver anymore, this is still part of the fabric that makes me the individual that I am, and so it's still an important role in my life. And this is really where we derive our worth from, is in fulfilling these roles. And there are specific tasks or activities that then can be fit into how you've broken down these roles. So when you're considering the person that you're caring for, think about what roles has your person held throughout their life, or what roles do they currently hold? Especially focus, what roles do they cherish the most? That's really the ones that we want to focus in on and try to still work towards creating activities that help them feel the sense of fulfilling that role. Now, when we look specifically, so we've started with the broad perspective of worth, and then we break it down into roles, and you can even break the broad roles into more categories. Now let's look at specific activities that fulfill those roles. And really, sometimes when I talk about activities, I think people have somewhat of a limited perspective. They tend to focus in on that last category of the social activities, where I'm going out to dinner with friends or I go to a movie. In this context, understand that activities is absolutely everything that you do on a daily basis. So they include things like household chores, like cooking and cleaning. Not my favorite roles to hold, but they still do create that sense of worth. I know that I'm taking care of my family. I'm nourishing my family by cooking for them and keeping the home clean for them. They also incorporate personal care activities, so that grooming and dressing and bathing. Quiet activities, which are activities more that bring peace to you as an individual, something that doesn't require a lot of thought or energy. And then in contrast, we have the more active activities, which they can be physically active activities. They can also be mentally active activities. And then finally, social activities. This is when we are spending time with other people. So you can use all of these different categories of activities to fill your person's day with that meaning and purpose and that sense of worth. And know that these activities can be broken down into such small chunks. So for example, we have our morning routine where we get up and we prepare coffee. We go get the newspaper. We prepare breakfast. We eat breakfast. We read the newspaper. We clean up after breakfast. So all of these activities can be broken down into steps or stages to complete them as well. Now I do want to focus on how dementia impacts a person's ability to participate or to initiate activities. Those of you who have cared for someone for an amount of time, this is not going to be new information for you. As I go over it, I want to think of it in the context now of activities and how that impacts your person's ability to engage in activities. So as someone develops and progresses through dementia, you will see changes in their spatial navigation, in their directionality, understanding their left versus their right. Also changes in their orientation, understanding where they are or how they got there, and recognition of objects, faces. Discrimination is another word for that. So if you think of that in the context of activities, well, certainly we probably don't want to do something that requires them to navigate if that's something they're losing the ability to do. We don't want to rely on their ability to recognize objects or items or faces. When it comes to language, someone with a dementia can early on start to struggle with things like word finding, a loss of reading comprehension as well. I always, when I mention that one, I want to pause for a moment and have you think about, is reading comprehension an important part of reading? My argument always is if someone is enjoying the time they're spending reading a book, whether or not they understand what they're reading, it's still a valuable activity for them to participate in. Really, we want to focus on with these activities, not only is it bringing them worth, but is it bringing them joy and contentment. And someone who has been a lifelong reader can derive a lot of contentment out of simply holding the book and turning the pages and reading over the words, even if they're not retained or understood. In language as well, someone with dementia can have trouble organizing their thoughts. So asking them to perhaps tell a story of something that happened, they may not be able to get those facts in the right order. Auditory processing, so understanding what you're trying to communicate to them. Language interpretation and following instructions. Boy, that's really going to impact how you present an activity if your person is struggling with those. Finally, always remember with language, nonverbal will remain very, very strong in your person throughout the progression of the disease and become more and more their mode of communication. So always be mindful of what your nonverbals are saying to them and also what their nonverbals are saying to you, because it's going to speak much more loudly than the words that they're using. When it comes to executive function, this is your ability to execute behaviors. So planning. Oh boy, if your person can't plan an activity, that's really going to impact how you initiate with them. Problem solving as well. If they run into an issue that's unexpected, they may not be able to figure out the steps to solve that problem anymore. sequencing, putting the steps of an activity in the right order, task completion, actually carrying an activity through to the end, and then finally task flexibility, which is their ability to adapt to a different situation. And a lot of times with these, I use this analogy of roadblocks and detours when it comes to someone with dementia. And a normal part of aging is we have something unexpected happen. We have a roadblock come up in front of us. And a normal part of aging is we're able to think through the steps to solve that problem. We can detour around that issue. Someone with dementia has that same roadblock come up in front of them, and they may not be able to detour on their own anymore. And that's, again, where our role comes in. How do we help them detour? Memory. We probably well know one of the initial symptoms of dementia is short-term memory loss. Well, if your person isn't able to retain what you said to them just a few minutes ago, that significantly impacts their ability to participate. But remember, long-term memory is preserved longer. So we want to consider activities maybe that don't rely on short-term memory, but instead rely on things that are preserved longer, things that have become very routine for them or stored away in their long-term memory. And then when it comes to attention and concentration, your person, you will notice, will become more and more distractible as the dementia progresses. So again, I don't anticipate that I gave you anything new with that information, but my hope is that you were thinking in the vein of activities and how can we modify or adapt those activities to help our person be successful. Once we consider those roles that we had talked about and then how our person's abilities are changing, now we have to strike a balance with them. So consider what has happened in the past. Ask yourself, what have they always done? This can generally be a really good place to start when you're trying to schedule activities for your person. Start with things that they've always done or are familiar to them, though don't discount things that are new. I've known many people with dementia who, for example, we have some incredible arts engagement programs. These individuals have never been artistic in the past, and they come to these programs where they're actually creating artwork and they just really take to it. Though a good rule of thumb is starting where the person has always been. Start with what was their comfort zone and then try to add in newer things. So ask yourself, what have they always done and how have they always done it? We consider that from the past, then also have to think about how have things changed now? Where are we currently? So how are things different? Different in their preferences, different in their interests, and then also how have their abilities changed? So let's look at an example. In the past, it's always been pretty important to me to keep clean. And I've always done this with a shower. I take the shower every morning when I wake up, and it's a way to energize myself and get ready to take on the day. Now, let's say that I've developed a dementia, and so currently, when we look at how are things different, well, I have short-term memory loss. I'm easily overwhelmed by too much information, and I'm also easily distracted. When we look at changes in my preferences or my interests, well, maybe now instead of enjoying getting up early, maybe I tend to sleep in quite a bit more. And when we look at changes in my abilities, maybe I have an inappropriate use of the product, I'm more prone to falls. And so we need to try to strike a balance between the past and the current ability levels. Well, if I have a short-term memory problem, I'm probably going to need more and more reminders to go and take my daily shower. If I'm easily overwhelmed, maybe cleaning out the shower and having just the products that I need in there. Again, if I'm easily distracted from what I'm doing, removing things, calming the environment down. If I like to sleep in, maybe engaging in a battle to get me to get up in the morning and take a shower isn't really going to be worth it anymore. So maybe we adapt what's happened in the past to fit my current abilities. And now instead I still shower when I wake up, but it's much later in the morning. Or maybe I'm able to shift to an evening shower where this is a way to help calm me down and get ready to rest at night. If I have an inappropriate use of products, perhaps we're using bigger labels on them. Perhaps we get a one product that serves for many things, like the 3-in-1 shower conditioner bath gel. Perhaps I need someone sitting in there with me and handing me the products that I need. If I'm more prone to falls, maybe I need some adaptive equipment in the shower. So consider where your person has always been when it comes to an activity and try to balance that with where they currently are. Before we get into strategies to help modify activities, there are some general rules of thumb to help make every activity successful. And some steps to success that we can use, first of all, is to manage fatigue. You have probably learned by now that fatigue is the person with dementia's absolute worst enemy. And so if you want them to engage in activities, it's very important that you make sure that they're well rested, especially if you're asking them to do one of those active or taxing activities. Along those lines, when it comes to managing fatigue, you want to be sure you're planning things during your person's best time of day and that they incorporate routine. You know, routine is very comforting for an individual who is finding the world to be more and more unfamiliar. And so trying to set up a bit of a routine, where I don't mean you set the alarm every single morning, but a routine where we work with this person's energy levels. You know, generally speaking, we have peaks and valleys in our energy levels that are relatively consistent throughout our days. And so it becomes quite important for you to start to learn, where are your person's peaks and valleys? When is their best time of day? When are they their sharpest, most energetic? When we get to learn those, for example, let's say your person's best time of day turns out to be 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, that's when you schedule those taxing activities, going to the beauty shop, visiting with the grandkids, social activities, going out with friends, things that require a lot of thought, of mental or physical energy. You absolutely do not schedule those taxing activities when you know your person is in a valley, when they've hit the bottom. So if you know 1 o'clock in the afternoon is when your person kind of tanks, that's when you schedule those quiet, soothing activities, or just schedule a rest period for them. When it comes to fatigue as well, you may need to consider shortening activities or trimming them up in length, and allow for plenty of rest following an activity. So earlier I mentioned the example of the morning routine where you get up and you get the paper and you make coffee and you have breakfast and you clean up. Once you go through all of those activities that make up your morning routine, that will probably be pretty fatiguing for your person. So once you get those completed, then schedule one of those quiet, peaceful, calming activities so that your person can rest and rejuvenate and get ready to take on the next more taxing activity. The next step to success is pre-planning. Pre-planning in considering what we've already been talking about. What do you think will work for your person? What has worked for them in the past? How do we modify it and rectify it with their current abilities? Pre-planning also in the fact that it's very important that you are ready to initiate, engage in, or participate in that activity as well. So a great example of this would be taking a shower, the one that we did where we were trying to balance the past with the current abilities. Sometimes bathing can be a real struggle for caregivers to get their person into the shower. And if you are not ready to initiate or engage in that activity, if you go to them with that tension and stress, thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a failure, I'm not looking forward to this at all, your person's going to read that off of you, and it's going to be that much more difficult, if not impossible, to get them to engage. So whatever you need to do, take a deep breath, put it off till a little bit later, whatever you need to do, make sure that you are ready to do the activity as well. Think ahead about how you're going to introduce it to your person. So semantics can be really important, as well as your nonverbals. So make sure your tone of voice, even though you're knowing it's dreaded bath time, make sure that your tone of voice is saying, yes, this is the best time of day. I can't wait to do this with you. Make sure your nonverbals and your facial expression are conveying that to your person, because they're going to read that more than the words that are coming out of your mouth. With that being said, as I mentioned, though, semantics are important. So if we go back to the bath or the shower example, perhaps saying, let's go take a bath, doesn't really work for your person. Can you soften that language in some way? Come on, it's time to get freshened up, maybe a little bit more palatable. So think of the words you use and also how you're conveying those words to your person. So now you're ready to do this activity. You've introduced it to your person. They're ready to go. And the next thing with pre-planning is making sure you have everything you need together. Once you finally get them into the bathroom and you realize, oh my gosh, I forgot the towel, and you have to run out into the hall to the linen closet to grab a towel, you've probably lost all that momentum that you've gained from initiating appropriately. So make sure that you have everything you need ahead of time. Make sure all their basic needs are met. This can become a major distraction. If your person is hungry or thirsty or in pain or has to go to the bathroom, they may not be able to verbalize that need to you. So especially before doing one of those taxing activities or something that requires a lot of focus, make sure that that's not going to distract them. And then for pre-planning, finally allow plenty of time, especially if you're planning on walking out the door. It is just going to take your person more time to complete activities than it did in the past. And so you're going to need to pad that timeline, especially if you're trying to get them to go somewhere. You'll find your person become distracted, forget what they were doing, or that you were going anywhere, that you had a time frame at all, because time's starting to become a foreign concept to them. So just be sure that you pad your schedule with plenty of time. Finally, another step to success is engagement. Now with this, we can do a variety of things as well. So incorporate the senses. Senses can enhance an activity. They also can distract from it as well. Keep it social. Really trying to get your person to be with other people. Because when your person gets to be with other people, that means you do as well. Also consider that family or friends may need to initiate the activity. Sometimes let's go back to bath because that is such a battleground for a lot of caregivers. Think about, is there someone that your person always listens to, that whenever they ask them to do something, your person's willing to do it? I had one caregiver in one of our support groups who this was one of their sons. And it got to the point where the son would actually fly in when they had a doctor's appointment because the husband wasn't able to get his wife to go to doctor's appointments, no matter what strategies he tried. And the son was able to, really had no issue at all. So maybe it's figuring out who is that person that your person always listens to. And then finally, avoid doing for your person. Sometimes this is hard. You know, as a caregiver, we get used to looking at where do I need to step in? Where does my person need help? Where do I pick up the slack, if you will? And that causes us to focus on losses, and it also causes us to sometimes sweep tasks away from our person. Learn to provide prompts for them and watch their nonverbals again. See if they're communicating to you any frustration or fatigue or failure. Now, when it comes to modifying activities, there are 3 different ways that we can modify. Again, as I said, this says most activities, but I haven't found one yet that we can't find some way to modify it. So modifying activities can happen in 3 different ways. You can modify in the amount of time spent doing a task and also the time of day that it happens. You can modify by both the level and type of participation. And then you also can modify by utilizing the senses. So let's look a little more in depth at these. When it comes to modifying activities, understand this pie chart is very generally speaking. This is just a ballpark. But generally, someone in the mild stages of dementia can probably engage in an activity for 2 to probably a maximum of 3 hours. Again, this is going to fluctuate by the type of activity you're asking them to engage in. Something that requires more thought, they're going to need less time scheduled for it. When someone progresses to the moderate stage, probably between 30 and 60 minutes, and the advanced stage, probably 15 to a maximum of 30 minutes for engaging in a single activity. When we modify for participation, in the mild stage, you'll see your person has higher levels of engagement. Very early on, they're probably going to be pretty independent with their tasks, and they might progress to the point where they'll need some cueing from you or some reminders that it's time to do this task. When they progress to the moderate stage, they're going to need more prompting and more cueing. You'll see them become more distractible, and that short-term memory loss become more of an issue for them. You also can use a technique called task breakdown, which is where you're breaking things down into those little steps. If you remember earlier when we were looking at those gears of all the different changes that happen with dementia, the short-term memory problem, the inability to carry a task through to completion, the changes in their ability to know what order things should happen in, this is where task breakdown fits in. So as I said, it's breaking things down into much more manageable pieces. Sometimes we think that we're presenting our person with one thing to do. So for example, you approach your person and you say, "Hey, I've just started cooking dinner. Will you help me out by setting the table?" We think we've just asked them to do this one thing, just set the table for me. In reality, behind the scenes, your brain is putting in order probably thousands of little steps that end up with the finished product of the table being set. Your person might not know the first step. They might not know, they might get lost somewhere in the middle of those steps. So task breakdown would be saying, come with me into the kitchen. Open that cabinet. Get 4 plates out of the cabinet. And there's probably even ways that you can break that down even smaller. But it's breaking things down into manageable pieces so that your person can actually complete the task on their own. And then finally, for participation in the moderate stage, consider using less words. The more words you use, the more your person's going to have to think about what you've said and try to make sense of it. Instead, provide hand-over-hand assistance, which doesn't necessarily mean put your hand on top of their hand. You could perhaps sit next to them while they're eating dinner and mirror what you want them to do. Potentially use hand-over-hand assistance with them, or use the task breakdown technique as well. When someone progresses to the advanced stages, activities are going to be more successful when they're overlearned and very, very familiar. And really, this is where we want to focus in on utilizing the senses. At this point, your person is going to be completely reliant on their senses and nonverbal communication. And so when we focus on their strengths, that's what we really need to play to with those activities. I do also want to mention the importance of facilitating an activity. You know, the words we use, as I said, the difference between let's go take a bath and let's go freshen up, sometimes we start to view ourselves as caregivers as the activity director. And I think those semantics can sometimes be misleading. We don't want to direct, we don't want to do the activity for a person. Instead, try to think of yourself more as a facilitator, because sometimes it is difficult to relinquish that control or allow our person the time and space to do the activity on their own. Sometimes we become so focused on the task, and really the important part isn't the task and completing it perfectly. The important part is your person participating in the process. So reframe your thinking. You're not the director, you're not the leader, you are the facilitator of these activities. So facilitate actually means to make an action or process easy or easier. How can you lighten your person's load when you facilitate these activities? Ask, how can you make it easier for them rather than how can I get this done? Again, we take the focus from the task and we put it back on your person. Now, the final way to modify activities is through the senses. Now, early on, really do be aware that sensory input can go both ways for you. It can either enhance or distract from the experience. So consider what is coming in through the person's five senses. What are they hearing? What are they smelling? What are they seeing? And is it going to enhance or is it going to pull their attention or become potentially overwhelming for them as well? In the moderate stage, you can really start to use those activities to enhance the experience. How can you add different experiences to enhance the experience they're already having? And then finally, in the advanced stages, this is where your person was going to, again, become reliant on the use of their senses. So how can you simulate activities using sensory input, knowing that they can't fully do that activity anymore? Sometimes when I go through strategies and I talk about different methods that we can use to interact with someone with dementia, do activities with someone with dementia, I think I see a lot of people nodding when I talk about it and thinking, yeah, good idea, good idea. But then it's totally different when we try to put it into practice. So I wanted to go through a couple examples with you about how you can modify activities through the course of the disease. So one quiet activity that I love to participate in is doing Zentangles. And for any of you who are not familiar with them, Zentangles are images that end up looking like this. They look very complex, very intricate, but really when you break it down into small pieces, it's quite easy to do. It's just repetitive patterns over and over and over again, and there's a lot of flexibility within those patterns. So this is something that I love to do when I'm de-stressing or I have some free time. And so perhaps if I develop dementia, let's look at how we might adapt my love of doing Zentangles throughout the course. So if I'm in the mild stages, it's a quiet activity. It's something that brings me calm and peace. And so I can probably do this just about any time of day. Maybe focus on it for an hour or two, but I may need some help early on. I may need my caregiver to come to me and bring the materials to me and say, hey, do you want to do this right now? I may need you to gather all the materials that I need because I might not remember all the pieces that I need to complete this activity. I may need cues with various patterns. Maybe we go to YouTube and look up a new one, or we go to my scrap paper where I've scrawled out all different kinds of patterns. In the early stage, I always want you to think about, too, is there a way you can do more with these activities? So with Zentangles being these small pieces of artwork, can I do something more? Just completing a tangle is nice and it's relaxing for me, but maybe then we could do more and turn them into gift cards for people. Maybe we can put them into frames and give them as gifts. Perhaps there's an office building or have some sort of connection in the community where these could become pieces of art that hang in their lobby or something like that. Think really creatively. This is a time to step outside the box. How can you do more? Because while doing that Zentangle is going to be relaxing to me, I'm going to derive a lot more worth and meaning from that activity if we do something more and I can see a broader impact from it. When we look at sensory adaptations in the early stage, probably we'll need to remove distractions for me. It does require focus to complete these pieces. So make sure that the drapes are pulled, you get my dog out of the room. Maybe some soothing music would be nice. This is a question mark because that soothing music could be a distraction, but listen to your person and watch your person and see what works best for them. And you may need to turn on some lights for me. It may not occur that I'm sitting in the dark or I need some better lighting. When I progress to the moderate stage, I can still probably do Zentangles any time of day. Maybe though I'm looking at like 15 to 30 minutes at this point. I will probably need you to initiate the activity for me. Again, gathering all the appropriate materials. Zentangles do require you to start with a blank piece of paper and create patterns on it. And it's unknown how I progress with this disease and how Zentangles will stay with me, but perhaps that blank piece of paper will become overwhelming. And maybe we adapt that instead I'm not doing these tangles where I start with blank pieces of paper. Maybe we modify it by giving me adult coloring books to work on, where the lines are already there. I just work within the parameters that are given rather than that vast expanse of blank paper. I may be able to do this independently still, or maybe I want to do this with someone else. Or maybe I would enjoy sitting and watching you complete these. And then we get back to, can we do more with this? Are there broader steps that you can take to find that worth as well? And then for sensory, again, in the moderate stage, reduce as many distractions as possible. Don't have the TV on in the background, those sorts of things. In the advanced stage, probably 5 to 10 minutes is all I'll be able to engage in this activity. I'm probably not going to be creating Zentangles at this point, or even working on adult coloring books, but maybe we can flip through the pieces that I've already done. Maybe you can talk about how you just love this one piece that I've created and how it makes you feel. What are your impressions of it? You can reminisce about how I always do my Zentangles when I'm on a plane, and so we can talk about the different trips that I've taken. Get the latest book of patterns and start flipping through them to see what's new and exciting in this world that has brought me a lot of joy. So for sensory, we're looking at sensory stimulation. So there's a lot of visual stimulation that comes with this, where we can look at these images. There also can be tactile stimulation, where perhaps in the very late stages, I'm just holding the pens, or I use my fingers to touch the paper and feel the weight of the paper. That may provide me a lot of comfort at the end. So you see, you can adapt these activities to really stimulate them no matter what my needs are. Another activity that I'll go through an example with is I'll do a personal care one, and it's dressing. So in the mild stage of the disease, probably we're going to be doing this as part of their routine. You're going to be getting dressed every morning. In the early stage, I may be able to still select my own clothing. You may need to help me with the coordination of them, though, matching the colors together, picking out things that are appropriate for the weather. I may still be able to dress myself, but I might need some cues for you about what the next steps are. And I may need some help with the details, such as putting on my earrings or makeup, things like that. With sensory, there's stimulation that comes with that and the feel and the comfort of the clothing. When I progress to the moderate stage, time is going to stay the same for a personal care activity. But in the moderate stage, I might start to fixate on certain clothing. Perhaps I always want to wear my black t-shirt and jeans. And sometimes caregivers can really struggle to get their person in different clothing. One strategy that you can use is just you got to work with it sometimes. We need to let go of these previously held standards that we have for a person. So buy me 7 black t-shirts and 7 pairs of jeans, and you know I'll be happy. Then when I go and take my daily shower, you can whisk away those dirty clothes and replace them with new ones, and I won't be any the wiser. Go through the closets now for the moderate stage. Pull out anything that isn't necessary anymore. They're probably not going to be wearing the ball gown or those sorts of things. You may also want to pull out seasonal items as well and pack them away. This will reduce the risk of me going in and pulling out inappropriate clothes. You can also offer choices. This is instead of sweeping this away from me, giving me the autonomy to choose what I want to wear, give me 2 options. Give me 2 appropriate choices to choose from. And know that in the moderate stage, I may need assistance with what order I put the clothes on. I also may need assistance with the fasteners, the zippers, and the buttons. Know that in the moderate stage, someone with dementia, their sense of smell can become compromised, and they may not recognize anymore that their clothing is soiled or mismatched. And then finally, in the advanced stage, the person with dementia is going to need total assistance. And this is where we modify the clothing for really the ease for the wearability of it and the ease of getting it on and off the person. So look for things that have elastic waists, that use Velcro as a fastener. You don't want things that open and close in the back. And also maybe consider getting a slightly larger size because it will be that much easier to get it on and off of the person. In the advanced stage, you really want to focus on soft, comfortable fabrics. You also can consider the smell of line-dried clothing, the smell of fabric softener. That can really enhance the experience. Pulling something fresh out of the dryer as well. So hopefully that gives you a better idea of how activities can be modified, because as I continue to say, activities can be modified no matter what stage of the disease your person is in. Now, once we do an activity with them, we need to evaluate the response. And I don't want you to, if you have a bad experience, don't blame the task initially. There's so much that goes into the success of an activity that isn't the actual activity. So consider what works and modify what doesn't. This isn't foolproof, unfortunately. I've given you a lot of strategies that can be helpful, but you know your person best, and you're going to have to tailor and tweak these strategies until you find what works best for them. Carefully watch your person doing the activity and listen to what they're telling us. Tell is in quotes because I don't want you to just listen to the words they're using. Look at their nonverbals. Are their shoulders getting tense? Are they showing you signs of anxiety or fatigue or disinterest? They're not going to use their words to tell us this. So look at what are their nonverbals saying. And then also listen to what other people observe, especially if your person is perhaps doing something out of your company. Sometimes we can go to them and say, oh, well, how was that? And they'll say, terrible. But when we talk to other people involved, they say, oh my gosh, your person was so engaged. They just loved it. I couldn't get them to stop. So talk to other people about what their impressions were about how your person engaged in and enjoyed the activity. When something doesn't work, again, don't blame the task initially. Think about all of these other things. Think about those steps to success that we talked about earlier. Was your person too tired? Did we ask them to do more than we should have at that point in time? Were their basic needs met, or were we asking them to eat a late lunch, or we didn't give them their water bottle that they like to have next to them? Did we forget to give them their pain medication? Those sorts of things. Was the activity a little bit off? Did we make it too far above their level, or did we make it too simplistic? Was it too childlike? Did we ask them to spend too much time engaging in it? Did we play to our person's strengths rather than trying to compensate for areas of weakness? What was the environment like? Was it too loud? Was the temperature off a little bit? Was it too noisy? Was there too much going on? How were others in the participation? Did they welcome your person? Were they inclusive? Were they helpful? Or were they maybe too helpful? Sometimes people can get a little bit over the top, and that can be a turnoff for your person. And then how were you in this activity? Did your attitude and your body language help the activity, or did it maybe hinder it a little bit? There may come a point in time where scheduling your person's day with these activities to provide them with these senses of worth can become overwhelming. As your person progresses, you take on more and more and more, and it's not just activities that provide worth. It becomes physical care. It becomes managing the finances, managing the home. All those sorts of things start to accumulate and build, and so there can come a point in time where you can't be that activity director anymore. I would encourage you to engage family members and friends as early as possible in the disease and keep them engaged. Above all, Alzheimer's is not an excuse for someone to discontinue their relationship with a person with dementia. Unfortunately, that's what we see happen quite a bit. I would really encourage you to communicate early with friends and family members, not about every detail of the diagnosis, but stress to them the importance of their relationship with you and your person. Give them strategies to help them have success when they take your person out to eat or take them golfing, whatever they've always enjoyed doing with your person. Ask them to engage in something specific too. Oh, she loved to go play bridge every Tuesday afternoon, so if you wouldn't mind picking her up since she can't drive anymore. And then give them little strategies. She might not know the rules of the game, so you might need to cue her, those sorts of things. Also consider an adult day healthcare program. Oftentimes this is met with resistance, almost more so by the caregiver than the person with dementia. Often I hear caregivers say, well, that works well for other people, but that won't work for my person. Don't let yourself be the barrier to this incredible service. Adult day health cares can help engage your person in activities, give them that sense of meaning and purpose and social engagement, and it also gives you a break from them and, frankly, them a break from you. You can get some breathing room. So do try to consider an adult day health care program. And then you can also, if going out of the home doesn't work, consider hiring a companion through a non-medical home care program. You can discuss with them different needs, if they're able to maybe do household chores and run errands with your person, engage in certain activities. So there's some options to pull in additional help when you start to hit that period of overwhelm. So before I open it up to question and answer, it's important to remember that your person with dementia may not remember how to engage in or remember the specific activities that gave them that sense of worth and fulfill those roles that they held so dear throughout their life. This is really where, as a caregiver, we come in, and it's so vitally important for us to help them fulfill those roles and contribute to that sense of worth. And I found a quote from C.S. Lewis that I thought really spoke to this, which says, "A friend is someone who knows the song in your heart and can sing it back to you when you have forgotten the words." And I think that's very apropos for the role of a caregiver of someone with a dementing illness. So I thank you for your attention this afternoon, and I'm happy to open it up for any questions that any of you might have at this point.
Well, thank you, Heather, for that really thoughtful and enlightening discussion. I think you were just so thorough in talking about roles and activities kind of through the life cycle. We do have one question here. This person says, what should I do if my husband can no longer do the activity he used to love at all? Reading. Not only can he not do it, but it seems to frustrate and anger him. What would you suggest?
So I think that's an important point to make. I talked earlier about, is it really important if the person doesn't understand what they're reading? And your baseline should be that, are they feeling a sense of worth? Are they having a positive experience? And so the key, I think, is the person is not happy about the experience. They're feeling frustrated by it. Not knowing these limited details, sometimes it's hard. So some suggestions would be, could someone read to him? Especially I would think of perhaps a child or something who maybe is learning to read. Or could you sit down and read the newspaper with him and discuss the stories? Could you look for things with larger fonts? Maybe that would be more accommodating if he's not able to see the words. Books on tape are another good option as well. But look, maybe are there different sources? Or could we look at a magazine that, while it does have the words that maybe he's not able to read or understand anymore, has the vivid pictures on it that could allude to what's happening in the words? So I would look towards different sources and perhaps like a different medium where maybe someone is reading to him.
Excellent suggestion. We have actually one more question I think we have time for. This participant said that he really appreciates your reflection kind of on the roles and interests throughout life. He says here, my wife has never really had any interests except for her work as an accountant. Where do you suggest I start in getting her engaged in some activities?
Mm-hmm. So I would think about, what does an accountant do to fill their day? And I don't know if she worked on a computer, but perhaps sitting your wife at the computer, having her balance the checkbook maybe. Even if you can give her a checkbook that is no longer valid anymore and have her crunch those numbers, have her look over the bank statements. I would look towards the components of her job, and even if she's not specifically executing them anymore, she can still have that sense of completing that task.
Excellent. What a worthwhile discussion. I really appreciate your explanation, Heather. I think this is a really worthwhile topic, as I think many families struggle with keeping the person with dementia engaged and also just making sure that they feel successful and worthwhile. So I want to mention that we really appreciate you joining us and would really like for you to join us next month on September 20th as we discuss carving out time for me. How is that even possible? Thanks again for joining Dementia Dialogues, where we bring the dementia education to you.